Good morning, world. Ali Abuzlam here with Mr. Jerrod Hardy, and we are here to empower people in their lives to take more action and live on purpose. So let's get started today.
What's up, everybody?
Okay, guys, this podcast is going to be about how parents influence our lives. So let's start with you, Ali. How have your parents influenced your life?
I come from a very diverse upbringing. So I have a Palestinian Muslim father and a Mexican Catholic mother. So very passionate cultures that are very intense. And I've definitely been raised differently by both of my parents. My father was more of a, I wouldn't say disciplinarian, but he was the type of dad who would really motivate through challenge. You know, he'd never say like, "Good job, son, I'm proud of you." He'd be like, "The hell is that? You can do better than that," you know, or like, "What, you know, that's not good enough," kind of thing. And my mother was the complete opposite. You know, always words of affirmation, words of encouragement, even from a very young age, which maybe was a mistake of hers. Would say, you know, adults aren't always right. Ask questions, kind of thing. But my dad, on the other hand, was very, nah, you got to do better. You know, you got an A plus, you need an A double plus, kind of thing.
There's always something else on top.
Yeah, always reaching. So that's kind of a high level overview, really, of my parents' parenting style. What about you, Jerrod?
I would sum it up the easiest is that my mom was 16 when she got pregnant with me, and my dad was 18. So I literally grew up with my parents. And I think that's probably one of the most impactful things in my life as I've gotten older and gone through my own journey in parenting, realizing that some of the things I had felt anger about and upset about and happy about, they were growing at the same time I was growing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that really shaped my perspective on parenting and the fact there's no 100% right answer all the time. And I love talking about parenting and what we're going to talk about today and dive in, but at no point do I want this to be an excuse-making story. You know what I mean? We all have stories. We have great stories. We have bad stories, but there's always something we're going to take away from these. And to me, the biggest thing as I reflect back is it's almost amazing to grow up with your parents. And I know a bunch of our listeners probably have similar stories, you know, teenage parents. And man, you're making your way through life, not only trying to figure out who you are, but now you have a whole other person you're trying to help them figure out who they are. And that's a huge burden.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this too, but very, very similar situation. My mother had me when she was 17. I believe my dad was a little bit older in his early 20s, 22, 23, but I definitely grew up with some of those obstacles of having a kid as a parent, you know, and I took note of that at a very young age. I realized that, hey, my friends had much older parents, and it was a very different dynamic to where I think it forces you to grow up a little bit early because you realize that your parents are, like you said, are still growing up too. And I'm fortunate to have had both of my parents raised me for a little while. They divorced in the 6th grade, but for the most part, my dad was still around. So I think it's really a privilege to be able to see that dynamic, even if it's just for a little bit of that parent, the parent dynamic with your mom and dad. I remember as a kid, I would find the most happiness. I would be the most content when my parents were really happy and like really lovey. You know, I felt it's like I innately knew like love was the answer, right? To where when they were really happy and loving, like I was really happy as a child. And I would have the most like trauma and anxiety when they were fighting, when they weren't happy together. So it's interesting. It's interesting to think back on this, and I love that we're doing this today because I think that a lot of people, you know, you grow up and you want to put that behind you. You don't want to talk about childhood or especially like parents, right? I mean, everyone, they talk about teenagers and once you're 18, you're ready to get the fuck out of the house. It's like, get me out of there, right? And I mean, to this day, love you, Mom, if you ever listen to this, but to this day, I mean, a couple days with my mom, like, all right, I gotta go, you know. Or a couple days with my dad, like, I love him to death, but there's only so much I can take. However, I think it's really important to go back and really look at the way things impacted you with parenting. You know, what do you think about that?
No, I 100% agree. And I will tell you, and I've spoken publicly on this numerous times, one of my biggest memories and one of the things that truly, it's kind of cliche to say, but it truly shaped my life. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And at that point, it was just me and my brother in the house, and I'm the oldest. He's about 4 years younger than me. And my parents, similar to what you said, like there was really good times, the family felt connected, and there was really, really bad times. And on this day, it was a really, really bad time. And my parents started fighting, and and they fought. It is what it is. They fought. And I took my little brother, and I went into our room and put him in the closet and hid him. I didn't want him to hear that. As an older brother, I'd heard this, and I kind of knew how this deal worked out, but he was little. I put him in the closet, put some toys in there, shut the door. And I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, just looking at the door, waiting. And my dad came in, and my dad's like, "Hey, grab your brother, let's go." And I was like, "Not leaving. I'm staying here." I had seen what happens to other families when people leave. Right? I had friends who never saw their dad, didn't see their mom, whatever, and I was like, "Not happening. Not leaving." He got mad at me, and he left. My mom comes in a few minutes later, and she's like, "Pack your bags, we're leaving." I was like, "Not leaving. I'm staying right here." And my dad and I weren't super close. But my mom, when I told her I wasn't leaving, I saw the hurt in her eyes. And as a 6-year-old kid, I knew what I had just done. I had just committed her to a life she may not have wanted. Right? Because there's no way she was leaving me. Which meant that she was no way she was ever leaving my dad. Which meant for the rest of the time she was responsible for me, I knew what I caused. And I will tell you that not to feel bad or sad, but to tell you that that is why I wake up every day doing the things I do in life, is because I know all the way back when I was 6 and I made that decision, I changed her life forever. And I never wanted her to come to me and go, "I wish you'd have left with me on that day." I always want her to look at me and go, "Man, you're doing the things I couldn't have done. That's what this is about." And, I don't know if I'm just different than other kids or what, but I knew exactly what I did. And
so your dad came back?
Everybody came back. We stayed together my whole life.
Wow.
They didn't get divorced until I was in my mid-30s.
Wow.
Right? But no, we stayed together. Happy? No. Ups and downs, for sure. Did they both probably want to be gone at some point? Absolutely. But, a 6-year-old kid, wasn't happening. At least if I had some say over it. And, that's a huge... I think a lot of people would look at that circumstance and be like, "That's what held me back." And instead, I see it the opposite. Like, that is what's made me successful, is because I took on a burden. And I realized that my mom probably gave up dreams she had to not have an abortion, to not give me up for adoption, to raise me, to not leave my dad. So now I have to do all the things that I should be doing in my life that she didn't get to do because of the decision I made for her. And I've shared this with her. I've shared this publicly. And, it is what it is. But I don't think you can constantly allow things that far in your past to go unresolved, unsaid, unprocessed. They just anchor you down. And I feel great. I feel great sharing that story because, I know there's a teenage mom out there that's not sure she's making the right decision. I know there's a young family that's struggling, and I'm here to tell you, I am exactly where you are if you accept what you have and then use it for the good.
And I think what you just said is the most important thing to do, right, is really accepting what you have and accepting whatever decision you make, right? Because let's say your mom was like, "Nah, hell no, son, we're going," and grabbed your 6-year-old up and said, "Let's go," and I think if you had gone that path, probably would have been fine and been successful in everything, but you would have just have to accept that path, right? But you didn't. You decided to stay. So, well, what would you say was kind of the positive results from that? As opposed to if you had been like, "All right, let's go," whether it was mom or dad. What would you say?
I think the results, not necessarily positive or negative, but the results. And I think that's one of the things to clarify. Too many times we look for positive results instead of just results, because good results you'll learn from, bad results you'll learn from, but we try to isolate the two. The results were, I saw a lot of dysfunction. I saw a lot of unhappiness. I saw a lot of things that I probably wish I hadn't seen. But on the flip side, I also saw people working through stuff. And I saw mom's unconditional love for her kids and what she would be willing to do. And I saw, quite honestly, for many of my years, what I didn't want to be in my dad. I didn't want alcoholism. I didn't want the relationships I saw. And for many years, I was like, okay, that's bad. I don't want that. And now I realize, like, no, that was actually good too. Because just as important as it was to learn the love and nurturing from my mom, it was equally as important to learn what I didn't want. Because that puts me on the path today. You can't have one without the other. And I think too many people want to look at, okay, I want to remember the good memories of my life and hold anger and resentment towards the bad. No, man, you need the bad memories because that is where you learn.
Oh, yeah. And
it balances you out. If my dad hadn't lived his life and my mom hadn't lived hers, I'm the product of both. So if I take either half of that away, I'm a completely different person. And I think once I reached that point, my own personal maturity of, hey, my dad didn't know any better.
Right.
He was doing the best he can. He had 3 kids. He was young. He gave up his dreams. My mom gave up dreams to keep me. So did he. I don't know what he wanted to be in life. I don't know if this is the life he envisioned for himself. And once I realized, like, even though I learned a lot of what I didn't want to be from him, that's an important part of my story. And I don't need to hold that against him. I need to forgive him and say, hey, you are who you are. I appreciate you being there every day. A lot of kids don't even have that. And was that always happy? No, but at least we were there. So I think to me that's the biggest lesson I learned is don't try to only look at the good stuff and hide the bad stuff. Like, you need both. And I think, like we talked about, once we start accepting what's the bad stuff in our life, we start accepting the things that we didn't really want to happen and we don't like to happen, we start taking back our power.
Yeah.
And we learn. Yeah, man, and honestly, life is lighter when you don't hold stuff against people forever. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, having raised kids of my own now, be honest with you guys, I don't know what they're going to tell you in 10 years.
Right.
Of what was good that I did and bad. All I can tell you is I love them and I tried my best. There's no freaking manual to parenting. There's no what works for Ali may not work for Alex. And then you have siblings. Like, there's so much to parenting. And it's easy for a lot of your life to be like, I'd have done this and I'd have done that. And then honestly, you get to where I'm at, my kids are becoming adults. And I'm like, I have no idea if I did anything right.
Yeah.
You really don't.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That's a whole different perspective of being a parent yourself. And God willing, I plan to be one day, but not there yet. So I'm still in that area of I probably would have done this and that. But you're exactly right to where you can appreciate everything that your parents have done, even if it's teaching you everything you don't want to be. And I think as a male, we look up to the male, the father figure, really to see how we want to live our life, right? And I can tell you right now, I mean, there's a lot of characteristics and habits that my father has that I do not want at all. But I'm extremely grateful to him for being there, he was always really good financially, but a lot of the same thing. It's funny, we had a really similar story, and I think the only reason why my mother didn't stick around, because she really did try, was because the actual physical abuse got to a point to where she's like, I have to go. Like I remember her saying like she was scared for her life, literally. And it was a very similar story to where the first traumatic incident was, I want to say, and this is a guess, I want to say I was about 8 or 9. My brother was about 4 or 5, and we're sitting in the car. It's an SUV. We're sitting in the back. My parents had kind of been arguing. We knew something was up, but we had never seen them like physically hit each other before. And we're in the back seat, kind of sitting out there, and then all the kind of see them yelling, and I see my mom kind of start to turn and walk away. My father grabs her by the hair and pulls her back, and then just starts hitting her. And we're just in the car like, what? Like, what the hell? So I start banging on the window, kind of yelling, and we're in our neighborhood, and then we see like adults walking out. Nobody's doing anything. They're just just watching it. And I'm just there helpless. So I remember like in that moment feeling just so helpless. And this kind of ties back to what scenarios or experiences in your life attribute to desires that you want. So I remember in that moment wanting to be bigger, stronger, and capable of protecting. And that was the first time we had ever seen that. So fast forward, and I think there had been like maybe small arguments where maybe had like a little bit of shoving, but the next time that really prompted the divorce, like a big physical fight, I was in the 5th grade. My dad's a really like loud-tempered man, he's about 6'2", 300 pounds, a big guy, and I remember he had been like pretty chill, and my parents, I had really learned how to be like a mediator, kind of keep things cool and not wanting everyone, because my mom is, she's a Mexican Latina woman, so she gets pretty heated as well. And I remember sitting there talking to my dad, my brother was over here on the couch, and my mom busts out of the living room and throws a shoe right in my dad's face. And I was just like, oh shit. And I look at my dad, and I'll never forget this moment, and he just goes, I'm sorry, kiddos, and just lunges and chases my mother. But this time I was older, I was in the 5th grade, so I run after him. We go in the bedroom, and he literally grabs my Nintendo GameCube, which if anyone knows that's a hard device, raises it over his head, and is about to hit her. And I go, and it sounds weird to this day, I go, no, Pop, not my GameCube, and I'm holding it. And of course, like, there's a little bit of desire for him not to break the game console, but I'm literally scared for my mom's life, subconsciously. I'm holding it, and thankfully he hears me, puts it down, and I think, hits her with his fist. And I remember in that moment wishing so much that I was stronger, that I could pull him off, because my little 5th grade body can't do anything. So I think for me, like translating to MMA, and I'm not saying that just because my parents had physical encounters that's why I fight, right? But I know that was definitely a big influence at a very early age of, hey, I need to be strong, I need to be capable of protecting, and that kind of shifted my whole mentality of like, I need to be able to protect not only myself but my family. Right? So that was a huge defining moment. And I'm not saying, I'm grateful for my dad for beating on my mom or anything, but I am grateful for the experience and how it translated. And because of that, that was kind of like the turning point to where my mom was like, can't do this anymore kind of thing. Because we were older, ended up leaving. But because of that experience, it really, it shifted so much. And to this day, I actually brought this specific story up. I told the story and spoke a little bit about it in a speech that I titled, I Love You Too, Misery. Right, kind of giving appreciation to the trauma and the miserable things that happen in your life, because through those, there's growth. After every winter comes spring without fail. And I told this story, and so many people afterwards were, I'm so sorry you had to go through this, and that's horrible and it's traumatic, and there's some more, especially some of the women in there are very like caring and stuff, and I appreciated it all, but at the same time I was like, that's part of my story. And part of like what made me who I am. And even to this day, if I bring it up, I recently brought it up to my father a few months ago, and I was asking him some tough questions, moving into the vulnerability, just to see how he would react, not to try and make him feel bad or anything, but asking him questions like, hey, Pop, do you remember that day? You remember? He's like, yeah, like I remember I had left and your mom called the police and I remember like jumping the fence and like all this stuff I didn't know. And I was like, oh shit, kind of giving me more insight. And just asking him questions like, do you remember grabbing my GameCube and stuff like that? And he's like, no, like I don't remember that. And all of a sudden he started to get defensive. You know, he was like, oh yeah, I was young and I was an idiot and like blah, blah. And I was like, oh, you know, I just want you to really think about this. Like, well, you did grab my GameCube. Do you remember like what that is? Like what it was? He's like, yeah. I was like, you think if you hit her with that, it would have killed her? And he kind of got silent and again kind of deflected the question. Was like, oh, you know, I was really young. But I think us just even being able to go there and even just like talk about an experience that's like way in the past that like built trauma really opened up the level of communication that we had, even if he didn't really want to talk about it that much, right? Just to be like, hey, like I remember that. Like this happened. This experience definitely shifted the direction of my life. You know, after that, you guys got a divorce. After that, you know, I had never felt more like, all right, like I got to make sure that I can protect. And it's just interesting how powerful going back to and revisiting misery, revisiting trauma, especially with the people who are involved, can kind of elevate you and help others. So that's definitely one thing I'm excited about for this podcast, is to empower our listeners to have those conversations with, you know, whether it be mom and dad, or some people are raised by aunt and uncle, grandma and grandpa, whoever those parent figures are, because everybody, I mean, no matter how great your life is, I think everybody probably has a story to where if it wasn't trauma, maybe very, very high discomfort, embarrassment, shame, guilt, whatever it is, that you can tie back to a guardian and maybe have those conversations and ask them, hey, do you remember this? What do you think about it today? What do you think about it now? How do you think it affected us? And it can kind of give some clarity on who you are and why you do the things you do.
Yeah, I think you said a couple things that were important there, and one of which was you appreciated the trauma, or you were grateful for it. I forget how you phrased it. It's not necessarily the trauma, not necessarily the incident we're grateful for, right? Because I think everybody in our human mind, we want to make we would like the least traumatic path in life, right? Like we don't want to have to, but what we're grateful for is the lessons that come out of that. And they're only available to you if you're willing to go there, right? And you're willing to revisit it and really think about, okay, why did this happen? What was I supposed to learn from this? And that's a huge piece. And we have a society nowadays, probably more so than ever, in which we try to protect everybody from all traumas. And that's fine. But then there's also the obligation to learn from the traumas you do have. And the degree of trauma is going to be completely different, right? Like for some people, it's going to be physical abuse. Some people, it's going to be seeing parent stuff like we've talked about. Others, it may be being bullied by friends or whatever the case. The trauma is going to teach you something if we actually give them coping skills on how to learn from the trauma. And the first thing is accept that trauma is part of life, right? We spend so much time trying to avoid it, man. It is what it is. And if we don't, and this is a parent's idea to you guys, is if I raise my kids for the first 18 years of their life, and everything that's bad that happens to them, I tell them it's not their fault. There's nothing they could have done. It's never your fault. I'm creating adults who don't know how to take accountability. And yes, when I was a little kid, could I have stopped my parents from fighting? No. Could I have made them happier and more in love? No. But I do know when I chose not to go with either of them that I caused them to stay together. Period. And I accept that. And I accept that because I made that decision, I now have to do things different in my life to make sure neither of them regret that. But it's only there if I know the trauma, if I know what happened and I'm willing to learn and move forward from it. And I think that's one of the things I would tell our listeners is don't hide from your trauma. Mm-hmm. Don't continue to push it to the back burner, because I'll guarantee you right now, most of you listening know exactly what incident, if you could fix or you could process, you would go to right now. Mm-hmm. You don't even have to think about it. Mm-hmm. You know, because you've been carrying it your whole damn life. So at what point do we quit carrying the weight of the trauma and start freeing ourselves and learn the lesson of the event.
Yeah, it starts with a conversation. It starts with a simple conversation, just talking about it, and even if it's not the person or people directly associated to the trauma, it helps us talking about it. Like for me, giving that speech in my Toastmasters club, it was very interesting because I feel very fortunate to have really good mentors and peers in my life that really kind of forced me to extract this type of thinking and really analyze events and stuff in my life, to where when I gave this speech, it wasn't because I felt like, all right, I need to face this trauma. It just so happened that I was challenged to give a new style of speaking, which was to inspire in a somber way. So I was like, all right, let me really think about this. How can I give an inspirational story? And I thought about what adversity have I overcome that has been kind of like sad, but that I'm grateful for, and that kind of story came up. And because of that, sharing it with strangers, it led me to speak with my father about it. And luckily, I don't feel like this has been something that I've been needing to talk about to kind of get to that next level. But because I did talk about it, it did level me up in a sense, and it makes me think, wow, what if that was something that I had never taken care of? What if to this day, after that day, I was like, fuck you, Dad, I'm never talking to you again. Like you're such an asshole. You ruined our family. Whatever. I could have easily taken that route and been like, he's kind of out of my life. And thankfully for any listeners out there, like I don't think my father's a bad person. Everyone makes mistakes. He came from a culture, a hyper masculine culture, and that's what he saw his dad did. Mm-hmm. My grandfather, and it's not like everyday daily abuse, but when you get to a certain point, and I even think it says in the Quran and even in the Bible too, actually, that in certain circumstances you can strike your wife, kind of thing, and it's unfortunate that cultures and things like that still believe that's okay. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't think my father, people really are inherently bad. People, I mean, even children you see are innately loving. They want to help. They want to support. That's how people are. We learn things, and again through parents. Parents is a huge thing of how you learn. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to take that parenting for what it is.
Yeah, but you're right. You wouldn't have even explored those feelings or those emotions unless you were committed to your own growth. Right? You're committed to your own growth through your social networking, through the people you spend your time with, through the people that you allow to influence your thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a missing ingredient for many people. We stay in our same circle, the same circle of people that allow us to be victims, allow us to not accept blame, allow us to push responsibility to everybody else but to the one person that's really going to create the life you want to have, and that's you. Right? And once you start opening the doors to personal growth, you start opening the doors to exploring who am I and why am I here and what is my true purpose, you find that all of your past experiences, good, bad, and in between, are why you're on your path. Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, maybe you didn't intend to share that story. And I never intended to share the decision I made when I was 6. But it's because I'm chasing being the best me possible. And I know in order to be the best me possible, to be the best Ali possible, you got to deal with things. And we have way too much in life now where people don't want to deal with stuff. And we can talk about this in a multitude of aspects. Mental health, suicide rates, people shooting up places they don't need to be shooting up. Mm. Right? Where does all that come from? And I think if you really dig deep, a lot of it is psychologically not feeling empowered to address the good and the bad that's happened in their life. Mm-hmm. And we've got to do better about that. We've got to have more places where people feel comfortable talking about it. And the reality is they're there. Those places are there. Those groups of people are there. You've just got to decide that you want to step up, that you want to make changes. And to me, it's as simple as that. And I like to keep things in life very, very simple. But I know that when I want my best life, when I want to move forward from the things that I know have been weighing me down, as soon as I make the decision to start moving, things get better.
Yeah. When you say they're there, what type of places come to mind? Because I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking specifically about the youth and kind of how I was raised, and I was very insecure as a young man. I think a lot because of my fear of people finding out how fucked up my household was, right?
Yeah.
Like my parents, the abuse in my household, and also like petty things of not our family not being as rich as some of the kids I went to high school with. So I was, especially after my parents' divorce, like I was this real good kid, and then after the divorce, it's like I was in the principal's office every other week, like bad. And I remember just being mean, like for no reason, just being mean to kids and being. I don't know what it was, but I think it's true when they say, you put others down to put yourself back up, and I was, I wasn't anywhere close to this type of headspace throughout middle school, early high school. I think I kind of started getting it a little bit more at the end of high school and into college of, you should probably treat people with respect. That's the better course of action. But especially for the youth, what kind of places do you think you can go to have these types of conversations and be vulnerable and talk about things like, parenting and things like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to me, the big one was always sports, right? Always being part of a team, always being part of something that's greater than you. And I think that's a good balancer. And I'm not saying you have to be an athlete, but be part of the band, be part of a club. What I'm getting at is when you're involved, you're going to create relationships with other people that are involved. And when you're involved in things that are trying to make others better, you're processing information differently. Versus isolating yourself, sitting at home, in the basement, alone with your thoughts and whatever electronic devices you have, because now you're not getting any social interaction. You're not getting any other perspectives. Because here's the reality. I may have had it rough. You could have had it worse. But if I don't get out and interact with you, I don't know perspective. I don't know that, oh man, this is bad, but guess what? I still had food. I had a roof over my head. I had clothes. My mom and dad lived together until I was in my mid-30s. So while it may seem bad to me and, I got the worst life and this is terrible, if I don't get out and share experiences, I don't even know that that's not really that bad.
Yeah.
And it's perspective, but right now it's so easy to isolate ourselves. Everything you need is on your phone, all this information, right? You can go downstairs and never talk to another human, but you're missing perspective. And I think that's really what we need to get. So I don't care how you do it, sports, activities, jogging clubs, whatever you're interested in. We, thankfully in Colorado, we have so much opportunity in our fingertips if we just take the step to be involved.
You're absolutely right. I think that was the perfect answer. And you'll notice that even the stereotypes and when you look at the characteristics of most of, you had mentioned shooters, but some of these kids that are shooting up places and stuff, they don't seem to be involved in any organizations, whether it's sports or band or drama or club. And it is relationships. I mean, that is the most important thing in life. I forgot what study it is. It's a very popular Harvard study, the longest one ever done of its kind on happiness. I think it's like 600 different people. They interview them for like 60 years. And the number one thing that people wish that they had worked on a little bit more in their deathbeds, it wasn't their career, it wasn't their art or anything. It was everyone hands down, it's like 90-something%. The relationships, whether that was with family members, whether that was with friends, but that is the point of life, right? Is connecting with others. And I think if we can start, you're exactly right. If we start there early on, we start to gain perspective. We start to see, everybody has problems, everybody has issues, everybody has trauma to overcome. It's just different kinds. So I think that's great. I don't think there's any other better message that we can give is to cultivate your current relationships, try to seek out new ones and then cut the ones that aren't serving you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the hard part, right? Because the reality is, in this whole conversation, which we focused on parenting, the person you may cut out of your life may be a parent, right? Let's call it what it is. You got a parent that's set in their ways, and they're set in their beliefs, and they're set in how they're going to see you, and what limits they're going to put on you. And they're going to tell you what's not possible and why you're not good and why you can't do this. That may be a person you have to limit in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to be okay with that, right? I think you process it and you talk to them about it. But at some point, your life is just that. It's your life. It's not Ali's life based on what I think Ali can be. Mm-hmm. Now, I hope that everybody has love and support and encouragement. Hey, get after it. Let me know I can support you. But that's not real. There are going to be people that don't want to see you succeed. There's going to be people that want to keep you as they always have seen you because that's comfortable for them, because then they don't face the fact they haven't grown. But at some point, when we're taking inventory of life and we're moving forward and saying, hey, this traumatic thing happened to me, and man, here's what I learned from this. And, Dad, here's what I learned from this. What was your perspective? Oh, great. Now we're both moving forward. Let's go.
Yeah.
If they don't want to move forward, you still got to go.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing, because culturally we've always been taught, like, you stay where you are. But staying where you are will always get you where you've been. Right? And I think when people, if they're processing stuff and moving forward, friends, family, spouses that don't believe and you don't want what's best for you, man, you got to start limiting your time around that. And you really got to look at those relationships of, who am I spending my time with? Am I spending my time with people that want the best for me, want to see me grow, want to challenge my thinking? Or do I feel I'm spending my time with the same group of people that have always been there that just tell me nothing's my fault? Well, the reality is, it is your fault.
Oh, yeah.
The incident may not be, but your growth from it, completely up to you.
100%. And Jerrod, you said something that I think is really, really important, especially when talking about parents, is that people, especially parents, I think, always want to see you for where they've always known you were at, and this person that you always were. And I've had personally a really difficult time of that transition, right? When you move out of the house, whether it's go off to college or you get your own place and you start becoming this adult, and you go back home and your parents are still, hey, wash the dishes, or hey, do this, treating you like a kid, and you're like, hey, I'm grown up now. And I think everybody experiences some level of that with their parents and with people. But you're exactly right, and it's a challenge because cutting family out of your life, some people will argue isn't right? I mean, I think in most of the major religions, they say, honor thy mother and thy father until, no matter what, show them honor, even if they're, spit in your face when you see them, still show them honor, kind of thing. So it's interesting, though, to talk about how maybe if you're not going to cut them out of your life, you do need to limit them. And I couldn't agree more, because quite frankly, talking about, my father, like that's not who I want in my circle of five, right? That's not who I want to be spending the most of my time with. Don't get me wrong, I love him to death. I try to call them in 5 days a week, even if it's just, hey, what's up, Pop? How you doing? Real quick check-in. But that's not who I want to be spending the majority of my time with. And I think that especially for him, to this day, he's just chosen to see me as this little boy Ali. And I think a part of it is maybe because, like you're saying, maybe because he hasn't experienced that growth, so he doesn't want to see me on this in this place where I have grown, right? Maybe because he hasn't, or whatever reason it is for him to hold me there. But I think that's something really important to listen to remember, is that a lot of people will still see you for something that you were in the past, and never see you for who you are in the present.
And I think on the flip side of that, if you always carry who they've always been with you, you're not allowing them the opportunity to grow either, right? And I think that's important, right? In order for your dad to grow, you had to have that conversation. Now, what he does with it is going to be up to him. But you have presented the opportunity which allows your growth to take place because you talked about the important things, right? I think sometimes we want it both ways. We want to be seen differently, but we don't want to see differently. And what I'm saying is, take it for what it is now. There was lessons to be learned. Now we all move forward. And if you want to move forward, then yeah, you're in my circle. If you don't, then unfortunately there's not enough space for everybody right now. And I think that's important is I know who to go to at certain points. If I have a big idea, I want to achieve something, and I'm just struggling maybe with my belief or getting it going, I know I can talk to my mom. She's always believed in me. I can do everything in her eyes. I'll never come up short. So that's it. That's where I go. I wouldn't go to my dad for that. He's got a completely different view. He sees limits and why things can't be done and why you should just stay the same. It's okay. It's not wrong. But now it's my job to manage those relationships as the adult I want to be. I put them in the place I need them.
Yeah. You need both, right?
For sure.
You need both to where you need that person who's going to challenge you. And I mean, I'm so grateful for my father because I wouldn't have had nearly the success that I have in half the things I do if it wasn't for his attitude. If it wasn't for his nah, you can do better, you should be the best. You should be number one. You should never lose. Wrestling in high school, one loss was your whole season's ruined. You need to be undefeated kind of thing. To where he literally expected perfection, and I really appreciate that because I know in the back of his head, and he's alluded to it a little bit, but I know in the back of his head he knows that I can't be perfect, but he would expect it and demand it all the time, and I am so grateful for that because I would say these other kids are bringing home B's and get to do whatever. It's I don't give a fuck about that. And a lot of pride, you're a Buzalam, you need to do this, and you got to be perfect. And without that type of push, I wouldn't be who I am today. And on the flip side too, my mother, it's not like she was definitely not a pushover by any means, but she was very similar to your mother to where you can do anything, and if it was a failure, hey, you're going to learn from this and you're going to grow from this. So that kind of combination, grateful for both. I think that everybody can find things that really push them to be who they are from both parents. So I think it's important for our listeners to dive into that, and you can get a lot of insights from looking at those parental relationships. It doesn't have to be mom and dad, but whoever raised you, you can get so much insight to yourself as to why do I do what I do? Why do I have the habits that I have today? Why am I on this path? I think if you really go back and analyze your relationships and experiences with your parental figures, that you can even find more insights. I mean, just like I did a few months ago on giving that speech, oh man, this is interesting, and diving deeper into that. I'm 27 years old and still learning stuff about myself. It's man, and I think, no matter how old you are, you can continue to learn things about yourself on, this may be a reason that I am like this today.
And I think that's a very important point is you should never quit learning. Right, your view of things is different. The experiences you have in your life now allow you to see a previous experience differently because you now have a different lens of experience. So continue to grow and continue to move forward. And honestly, this podcast here, we look back in 20 years, our view of what just took place could be completely different if we're willing to continue to look at things. And I think that's important for people to realize that's going to propel you in life. Your limitations, a lot of them were set for you. And you don't even know it. You just always did things a certain way because that's how you were told to do it. Well, if you want different, let's look at why we're doing that stuff. A lot of it's going to come down to what were you taught at an early age. What did you value? What did your parents value? What do you see as holding you back? What do you see as great successes? Let's explore that. And I think it's very enlightening when you actually take the time to reflect on who you are and why do you do what you do. And then it gives you a little more purpose.
Yeah, personal inventory. I don't think I don't think you can take enough of it.
And look, I think we both agree. We would not be here today without both the good and the bad by both parents and other family members if we hadn't had all of the experiences. If you take one piece away, it's like a math equation. If you take one number out, you have a different problem. You have a different result. Mm-hmm. We are the sum of everything. So let's not hide from it. Let's figure out, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? And I think that's truly when you start living the quote, living your best life. I think that's when you start living your life, is when you learn the lessons of what you were meant to learn along the way.
Living with purpose, on purpose.
Yeah, on purpose.
Right?
Yeah, that was good.
On purpose. But what do you think are some action items that we can leave with our listeners for the day? Because I think that there's, no matter who raised you, grandma freaking can be like Mowgli, raised by a pack of wolves. Study those. Study that relationship with the parentals, right? What do you think are some specific action items that our listeners can take on purpose to empower their lives?
Yeah, I think first off, you got to recognize that there's good and bad. And the good is easy to learn from. We've always done it. But let's look at the things that you think are traumatic and say, okay, what was it about this that I was supposed to learn? So I think, one, you got to identify that it's okay to have good and bad and accept that. I think, two, you got to find forgiveness. You really got to realize that there's no book for parenting. There's no manual for parenting. There's no license to have kids. In our case, our parents were fairly young, which meant they were growing up right alongside of us. And I got to forgive the things I think they should have done differently because I had a perspective of an 8-year-old kid. What did I know? Mm-hmm. But I think once you start to forgive, now the load becomes lighter.
Oh, yeah.
And you start to move. And I think, so one, accept that they're there. They're real. Let's deal with them. 2, forgive. And then 3, let's move forward. Let's have the conversation and let's put it out there. And then what they want to do with it is going to be their responsibility. But at least on your end, you've addressed what's holding you down. You've addressed what you've thought about over and over for years. Now let's move forward.
Love it.
And I don't think it has to be more complicated than that, and simple to me is better. So accept they're there, forgive, have conversations, and then move on. And live your life on your terms.
Love it. Yeah, so just to recap this action, 3-step action item is to accept that there's good and bad things that happen with your parental relationship, right? Number 2 is to have the conversation, right? Pick up the phone, meet with that parental, and have that conversation with the intention to forgive, right? Forgive for whatever it is. And then 3, moving forward. So talking to that parent, thinking about, I'm sure it's really easy for most listeners, right? To think about an experience with your parental figure that really impacted you, whether it was a positive, negative way, mostly negative. Something that maybe you haven't forgiven for, or maybe even ever talked about.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's that one time that your mom beat the shit out of you with a belt and you never forgave her for that, or forgot about you at school, left you an hour late. Who knows? Everyone's on a spectrum, but yeah, I think that's great. A little 3-step. Realize there's good and bad. Have the conversation. Move past it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's important when you have those conversations. You're framing that conversation about forgiving what had happened. Not a conversation of blame and I'm this because of that. That doesn't get you anywhere. Truly forgiving. And once you do that, then honestly life gets lighter. Because you're not carrying around baggage and things you weren't responsible for many, many years ago.
Amen.
Cool.
Well, until next week, guys. Thanks for listening.